you open your eyes and realize with utter horror that you have miraculously found yourself in the very heart of Paris in the year 1348. The air of this vast, overcrowded city immediately burns your unaccustomed lungs with the thick, almost tangible stench of rotting garbage and long unwashed human bodies. The narrow winding streets around you are submerged in thick, sticky mud that instantly covers your modern shoes and seeps right through the thin fabric. From all sides come the deafening shouts of street vendors, the anxious neighing of weary horses, and the constant creaking clatter of heavy wooden carts over broken stones. This is a great medieval metropolis that has never known true cleanliness in its long history, and it is already ready to kill you on your very first day. It is absolutely impossible for a modern person to fully imagine the level of daily domestic discomfort that was considered the absolute norm for every city dweller of that era. Here, there is absolutely no familiar running water, centralized sewage system, electric lighting, or even the most basic rules of personal hygiene to which we have become so accustomed today. Your modern, pampered body has absolutely no natural immunity to the extremely dangerous local bacteria, and your lungs have never breathed such poison in your life. A routine daily walk from your home to the nearest large market instantly turns into a brutal struggle for survival amid an aggressive and filthy crowd. In this historical video, you will see in full detail why your chances of surviving even a single full week under such conditions are zero. We will examine every single aspect of the daily life of an ordinary Parisian during that dark and brutal time in as much detail as possible, strictly relying on real historical documents. You will see with your own eyes what poor people ate day after day, what terrible water they drank, and how they tried to treat their endless ailments. I will paint a vivid picture of why, with the onset of night, this great city turned into the deadliest trap for any unwary traveler. We'll peek into incredibly gloomy, cramped dwellings where damp straw mattresses teemed with blood-sucking insects, and the icy night wind blew right through the thin, hole-ridden walls. Prepare for a complete and unconditional immersion into the harshest reality of the distant past, where literally every breath you took could be your last in a short life. The first thing that will completely shatter your modern psyche in medieval Paris is the incredible state of the roads beneath your feet. There is simply no smooth asphalt or neat cobblestones here, with the exception of a few main squares near large cathedrals and royal residences. Most of the narrow city alleys are simply open, compacted earth that turns into a deep, impassable quagmire of sticky clay after every light rain. Animals contribute significantly to the catastrophic pollution of city streets, turning them into veritable open-air breeding grounds for various dangerous diseases. Herds of filthy domestic pigs roam the streets completely unchecked, happily rooting through piles of discarded trash and eating the rotten remains of spoiled human food. These aggressive pigs leave behind huge piles of fresh manure, which mixes with the horse manure from thousands of horses that haul heavy merchant carts every day. The stench of animal shit constantly hangs in the stagnant air, soaking into your clothes, your hair, and even penetrating deep into the pores of your clean skin. It's simply impossible to breathe deeply in such conditions, so you'll have to constantly cover your nose with a piece of cloth, which will very quickly become saturated with the surrounding stench. The numerous slaughterhouses, located right in the densely populated city districts among ordinary wooden residential buildings, pose a huge danger to the unaccustomed modern person. Butchers slaughter hundreds of cows, sheep, and pigs every day, mercilessly dumping unwanted offal, hooves, and liters of hot blood right onto the street. The cramped conditions on these streets will also come as an incredible shock to you, because medieval Paris was built up incredibly densely and in a completely chaotic manner. The upper floors of the wooden houses constantly overhang the street, gradually widening with each new level, until the roofs of the buildings on opposite sides are almost touching one another. The enormous population density creates a constant Brownian motion in the streets, which is extremely exhausting for the nervous system of anyone accustomed to wide modern sidewalks. You'll have to constantly push your way through an aggressive crowd of beggars, cripples, loud vendors, stern artisans, and heavily armed mercenaries who couldn't care less about your apologies. Pickpockets operate in this crowd with masterful speed, so your modern gadgets or coins will vanish from your pockets within the first 5 minutes of such a challenging walk. The constant deafening noise of the city will be yet another serious ordeal for your unaccustomed ears, depriving you of even the slightest chance to enjoy the long-awaited silence. The huge, heavy bells of dozens of different churches and massive cathedrals constantly ring out over the city, announcing the time and calling all devout citizens to their next prayer. This resonant, coppery ringing mingles with the clang of thousands of blacksmiths' hammers, the shouts of street hawkers, and the incessant creaking of unlubricated wooden wheels on slippery stones. The mud will become firmly embedded in the fabric of your pants, and the smell of an unwashed body will mix with the stench of the street, turning you into an outcast even by this city's standards. Washing your clothes will be practically impossible because clean water costs money, and washing in the river only means soaking the fabric in new layers of waste. Very soon, you'll start to look like a typical ragged medieval beggar, and the guards will begin to eye you suspiciously, suspecting you of being a dangerous vagrant. Surviving on these streets for a whole week requires not only tremendous physical endurance, but also incredible luck, which you simply don't have. Every step you take harbors a hidden threat in the form of a rusty nail in the mud, a rabid dog, or a bucket of sewage suddenly flung out of a window. Your modern instincts are completely useless in this chaos, where the law of the jungle is the only law, and any scratch can lead to blood poisoning. This city does not forgive weakness and cruelly punishes all naive strangers who dare to set foot in its foul-smelling, dark, and endlessly dangerous alleys. The streets of Paris will become your first circle of hell, which will slowly and methodically destroy your health, your will, and your hope of returning home safely. The search for safe drinking water will become your most important and, at the same time, most impossible task on your very first day in medieval Paris. The main waterway and the heart of the entire city is the Seine River, which looks majestic only from a distance, but up close is a monstrous sight. Every day, tons of waste are dumped into this river from slaughterhouses, dyeing workshops, tanneries, and ordinary household sewage from the entire vast residential sector. The water in the Seine is a suspicious, murky color. It is constantly covered with a greasy film and often carries the bloated corpses of small domestic animals. Quenching your thirst with rainwater seems like a sensible idea until you realize exactly how rainwater is collected in the context of dense urban development. The water runs off dirty thatched or tiled roofs, picking up huge chunks of bird droppings, dried dust, and vast numbers of insect carcasses along the way. This black sludge collects in special wooden barrels, where it quickly stagnates in the heat and begins to bloom profusely with green algae. Drinking such stagnant water is even more dangerous than scooping it straight from a river, because the larvae of dangerous mosquitoes multiply rapidly in standing water. You'll have to choose between two deadly options, and either choice will inevitably lead to severe dehydration and illness. The lack of clean water makes washing one's body an unaffordable luxury for the vast majority of ordinary townspeople inhabiting this filthy medieval city. People bathe extremely rarely, preferring simply to wipe their faces with a damp cloth and change their undergarments if they have money for spare shirts. A layer of ingrained dirt on the skin is considered a kind of natural protection against the cold and dangerous diseases that penetrate the human body through open pores. Because of this, a thick, sour smell of stale sweat constantly emanates from every person, which in enclosed spaces becomes simply unbearable to breathe. You'll have to forget about hot showers and resign yourself to the fact that your body will very quickly become covered in a thick crust of dirt, causing constant and unbearable itching. Public baths in Paris do exist and are hugely popular, but going there would be the worst decision you could possibly make. The water in the wooden bathhouses is changed incredibly rarely, so dozens of completely different people take turns washing in the same tub of warm water. This water quickly turns into a thick broth of other people's dirt, skin flakes, bodily secretions, and dangerous infections left behind by previous filthy visitors. Prostitution thrives in such bathhouses, and the chance of contracting syphilis or another sexually transmitted disease through the dirty water is incredibly high for any casual visitor. Upon leaving such a Parisian public bathhouse, you will be significantly dirtier and sicker than you were before you crossed its welcoming wooden threshold. Water, which in our time serves as a symbol of purity and the source of life itself, is your greatest and most treacherous enemy in medieval Paris. It carries hidden death, lurking in every murky drop, and offers no escape from the suffocating filth of the overcrowded city streets. You won't be able to wash your hands before eating, you won't be able to rinse a minor scratch, and you won't be able to simply quench your growing thirst. This invisible water crisis will break your body down much faster than you can grasp the full scale of the global sanitary catastrophe surrounding you. The foul water of the Seine will be the very poison that sets in motion the irreversible process of your modern body's decay in the harsh conditions of the 14th century. Finding a safe and warm place to spend the night in a foreign medieval city will be your third critical mistake in the struggle for survival. Most residential buildings in Paris at that time were built from cheap wood and clay, forming incredibly flimsy, half-timbered structures ready to collapse at any moment. These buildings stand right up against one another, forming a solid wall of crooked facades that lean ever more heavily over the filthy street with each new floor. Because of this unique architecture, the lower rooms are always shrouded in impenetrable darkness, dampness, and a terrible cold that penetrates right down to your bones. The room you'll be able to rent for a pittance will resemble a dark, damp crypt more than a normal human dwelling. The biggest problem with these cheap houses is the complete lack of any decent insulation against the biting night winds and winter frosts. The walls are made of rough wicker, carelessly plastered with a mixture of cheap clay and straw, which constantly cracks and crumbles right onto the dirt floor. Through these huge cracks in the walls, an icy draft constantly blows into the room, which cannot be stopped even with tightly closed wooden shutters. There is simply no window glass in such poor homes. Instead, bull bladders or oiled paper are used, barely letting in the dim daylight. You'll have to sleep in such a cold room in your outer clothing, constantly shivering from the biting cold and trying to preserve even a drop of precious warmth. There is absolutely no soundproofing in a medieval house, which robs you of any hope of peaceful rest and privacy in your tiny room. The thin floors transmit every sound perfectly, so you'll hear every minute detail of the lives of your numerous noisy neighbors. Snoring, loud cursing, the cries of hungry children, and the creaking of old wooden beds will haunt you all night, creating an unbearable cacophony of sounds. If someone upstairs decides to relieve themselves outside the chamber pot, that foul-smelling liquid may well seep right through the floorboards onto your ceiling. The danger of a sudden building collapse is also a very real threat that constantly hangs over your head every minute of your sleep. Wooden beams, eaten away by bark beetles and rot from constant dampness, often cannot withstand the enormous weight of the upper floors and the heavy roof. Houses in Paris regularly collapse like houses of cards, burying dozens of sleeping poor people under their heavy rubble, with not the slightest chance of rescue. Every time an old building begins to creak menacingly under gusts of strong wind, your heart will pound wildly with the fear of being crushed. You will never be able to fall into a truly deep sleep, because your brain will constantly be in a state of extreme nervous tension and anxiety. The house that was supposed to be a reliable fortress and shelter for you turns out to be nothing more than a sophisticated torture chamber for the modern person. Insects slowly drink your blood, the night's cold steals away the last of your warmth, and the surrounding squalor destroys your psyche every second you're awake. You will fear the coming of night, because it is in the darkness that all these domestic nightmares acquire their true, incredibly monstrous power. Lack of sleep and constant stress will weaken your body so much that you will become the perfect target for any disease roaming the streets of Paris. Your body will be covered in bite wounds, your eyes will sink from lack of sleep, and you will realize that rest is absolutely impossible at this time. If by some miracle you survive the cold night and avoid poisoning from dirty water, your next deadly problem will be finding edible human food. The diet of an ordinary Parisian pauper in the 14th century consists mainly of incredibly hard black bread, which bears no resemblance to modern baked goods. This bread is baked from the cheapest, unrefined rye flour, into which greedy millers often mix huge amounts of sand, sawdust, and even dry clay. The crust of this bread is so hard that you can easily break your teeth on it, and the crumb has a strong sour taste and grinds unpleasantly between your teeth with every chew. Regular consumption of such a coarse product will very quickly lead to severe stomach upset and constant painful spasms in your delicate intestines. The Paris meat market is a real test of one's squeamishness because sanitary standards are virtually non-existent here. Vendors openly sell pieces of old, weathered meat that has already begun to be covered in an unpleasant sticky slime and to emit a characteristic sweetish smell of rot. To hide the obvious signs of spoilage, this stale meat is generously rubbed with cheap garlic, soaked in sour vinegar, and sprinkled with ash to preserve its color. Fish is a staple on numerous fasting days, but eating it poses a tremendous risk to your precious life. Fresh sea fish is incredibly expensive due to complex logistics, so the poor are left with either river fish from the dirty Seine or heavily salted cod. This salted fish is often already spoiled during transport, and its sharp, nauseating smell can be detected several blocks away from the fish stalls. If the fish hasn't been salted enough, deadly botulism bacteria begin to multiply rapidly inside it, killing people by causing respiratory paralysis. Trying to eat a piece of such questionable fish could be your last supper, after which no local medicine will be able to save you. The tableware you'll have to eat from is also a major source of dangerous infections and intestinal diseases in this brutal medieval society. Poor Parisians eat from shallow wooden bowls or use large pieces of thick, stale bread, called trenchers, instead of plates. This wooden tableware is never washed with hot water and soap, but only occasionally wiped with a dirty, damp cloth or simply scraped with a knife. Residues of Gruesome food become permanently embedded in the deep cracks of the wood, creating an ideal breeding ground for huge colonies of mold and deadly bacteria. Every new meal eaten from such a dirty wooden bowl adds a new dose of invisible, slow-acting poison to your defenseless body. Even if you miraculously manage to scrape together enough money to buy decent food, you'll face outright deception from street vendors. The pastry vendors on the streets of Paris are notorious for filling their pastries with offal of dubious origin, or even the meat of stray cats instead of good meat. Wine merchants ruthlessly dilute expensive wine with sour river water, and milk sellers generously add chalk to their product for thickness and a white color. Any attempt to complain about the quality of the goods you've purchased will immediately lead to a violent brawl, in which the crowd of vendors is guaranteed to side with their swindler. You'll have to silently swallow this disgusting counterfeit, knowing that you're voluntarily spending your last money on your own slow poisoning. Food safety simply does not exist in this city, turning every meal into a real game of Russian roulette with the highest possible stakes. Your body, deprived of its usual preservatives and sterile conditions, will begin to rapidly succumb to the onslaught of medieval bacteria, parasites, and heavy food toxins. You won't die of starvation instantly, but constant malnutrition and poisoning will destroy your liver, stomach, and intestines in literally a matter of days. Food, which is supposed to give you vitality, brings only excruciating pain here and rapidly brings you closer to your inevitable and very painful end. By the middle of the first week, you'll be afraid to put even a piece of ordinary bread in your mouth, preferring to suffer from hunger rather than writhe in terrible convulsions again. When the sun begins to sink below the rooftops of Paris, the city does not quiet down, but plunges into an atmosphere of mounting primal and uncontrollable fear. The evening bell, known as the couvre-feu, or the signal to extinguish the lights, rings out over the entire city, warning of the need to shut all doors. From that moment on, absolute, almost palpable darkness descends upon the narrow, winding streets. A darkness so thick that one cannot see even an arm's length ahead. There are no streetlights in the 14th century to speak of, and the only source of dim light is the occasional pale moon in the sky. To find yourself alone on such a dark Parisian street, without heavy weapons or a torch, is tantamount to voluntarily signing your own death warrant. Cheating and fraud thrive in these shadowy establishments on an incredible scale, and you will become the prime target of the local seasoned criminals. You will inevitably be offered a game of dice, and those dice are guaranteed to be weighted with lead to roll the numbers the house wants. Simply moving through the pitch-black darkness of the city streets puts you at risk of serious physical injury, which at this time of night could prove fatal. The roads are full of deep potholes, open sewer grates, and abandoned wooden carts that are impossible to spot without a good light source. If you stumble in the dark, you could easily break your ankle or fall face first into a pile of rotting garbage and sharp shards of broken pottery. Any open wound sustained in this filth will become infected instantly, and without antibiotics, a simple scratch will quickly turn into deadly gas gangrene. You'll be moving by touch, like a blind kitten, constantly risking breaking your legs on the slippery, uneven stones of the medieval cobblestones. Stray, starving dogs, gathering at night into huge and incredibly aggressive packs, represent yet another facet of the Parisian nightmarish reality. These animals know no human affection. They feed on corpses at slaughterhouses and have absolutely no fear of attacking lone and vulnerable people in the dark. Their bites are incredibly painful, but the main danger lies in the high risk of contracting rabies, which is rampant here. If you're bitten by a rabid dog in a dark alley, your death will be absolutely inevitable, incredibly agonizing, and will drag on for several terrifying days. It is absolutely impossible to fend off a pack of such enraged animals with your bare hands, and cries for help will only enrage them even more. Even if you try to hide in some abandoned shed or empty basement to wait out the dangerous night, it won't save you. The dampness of the basements seeps into your lungs, causing a severe cough that will immediately give away your hiding place to local looters or aggressive vagrants. The temperature drops sharply at night, and without warm clothing and a source of fire, you risk suffering severe hypothermia by early morning. Such dark, damp shelters are home to huge swarms of aggressive rats that can easily gnaw your face off while you're half asleep from exhaustion. Your attempt to hide will only turn you into easy prey for the horrors lurking in the darkest corners of this brutal metropolis. The psychological pressure of Paris at night breaks a person's will far more effectively than any overt physical pain or acute hunger. Every shadow seems like a lurking killer to you. Every rustle of the wind sounds like the footsteps of a thug or a wild beast creeping up behind you. Your imagination will paint the most terrifying pictures of violence, making your heart race at a frantic pace and pumping out tons of adrenaline. Dawn, if you even survive to see it, will bring you no relief, but only illuminate all the horror you endured in complete darkness. Your clothes will be torn and stained with dirt. Your hands will tremble from the primal fear you've experienced, and your eyes will be inflamed from constant strain and tears. You'll realize that the next night will be just as dangerous, and you have absolutely no way to escape this endless, terrifying cycle. The taverns and night streets of Paris are a veritable meat grinder for naive travelers, grinding their bones to dust and leaving no trace of the crime. Surviving in this darkness without preparation and reliable allies is a statistical anomaly that you certainly shouldn't count on. Any injury you sustain or any spoiled food you eat will inevitably lead you to seek help from medieval doctors. This decision will be your last and most fatal mistake, because local medicine is more dangerous and terrifying than most known diseases. Local doctors know absolutely nothing about germs, antibiotics, or basic antiseptic practices, preferring to rely on ancient texts and astrology. The most popular and universal remedy for absolutely any illness in 14th century Paris is copious and merciless bloodletting. If you develop a high fever from dirty water, the doctor will immediately pull out an unwashed, rusty lancet and cut open a vein in your weary arm. He will drain about half a litre of precious blood from your already exhausted body, arguing that it is necessary to rid you of bad fluids. The instrument he uses has been used on dozens of other sick patients and has never been wiped down with anything but a dirty rag. This procedure will not only rob you of your last physical strength, but is also guaranteed to introduce a severe, deadly infection into the open wound. Apothecaries will offer you medicines whose ingredients would make a modern person shudder with utter revulsion and horror. They use crushed earthworms, the droppings of various wild animals, pig bile, arsenic, mercury, and a huge amount of completely useless weeds. You'll be forced to drink a thick, bitter decoction that, at best, will cause severe vomiting, and at worst, will burn the lining of your stomach. Some ointments for treating open wounds are made from lard and dog urine, which cause immediate suppuration and gas gangrene. You'll pay a fortune for these poisonous concoctions, hoping for a miracle, but getting nothing in return but an extra dose of excruciating pain. Dental care deserves a special mention as one of the most terrifying nightmares you might face because of the local food. Due to the abundance of sand in the coarse bread, your teeth will quickly start crumbling, and sharp toothaches will become your constant companion. Dentists work right in the middle of bustling marketplaces, pulling out diseased teeth with huge rusty pliers in full view of the gawking crowd. No one will treat cavities. They'll simply pull the tooth out by the root, often breaking the patient's jawbone in the process and causing massive bleeding. The hole in the gum will quickly become infected from the ever-present dirt, and a simple toothache can easily turn into fatal sepsis, affecting the entire circulatory system. Quacks and sellers of magical amulets will try to profit from your desperation, offering completely absurd treatments for exorbitant prices. You'll be told to apply a dried toad's foot to the affected area, pray to a certain saint, or wear a pouch of crushed goat's hoof around your neck. In a state of delirium and high fever, you might easily believe these fairy tales and hand over your last coins for a piece of ordinary rubbish. Coughs and colds, caused by constantly sleeping on the cold floor and in drafts, quickly develop into chronic conditions with severe complications. Doctors will treat your lungs with hot cupping glasses, which leave huge bloody bruises and burns on your back without providing any real benefit. Phlegm will accumulate in your chest, making it hard to breathe, and a lack of vitamins will prevent your immune system from fighting off even the most common infection. You will slowly suffocate in a dark room, spitting blood onto dirty straw, while the doctor shakes his head. The only consolation for the local population is their belief in the afterlife, but for you, this fact will bring no physical relief. 14th century Parisian medicine is simply a legalized form of brutal murder, cloaked in fancy Latin terms and the solemn demeanor of doctors. Any visit to a doctor will only hasten your demise, adding to your symptoms the unbearable pain of barbaric surgical and therapeutic procedures. Your body will be left alone to face hordes of microbes, without the slightest hope of receiving quality or even safe care. A broken bone will render you a helpless invalid forever, and a simple stomach upset will quickly wither your body down to the state of a living skeleton. In this world, it is better to be healthy and rich, because a sick and poor stranger has absolutely no right to life here. Our survival scenario unfolds in the year 1348, and I chose this date for a very specific reason. It was in this terrible year that the most horrific catastrophe in the history of humanity struck the densely populated and filthy city of Paris. The bubonic plague, known as the Black Death, creeps unnoticed within the city walls, along with rats and fleas in the holds of arriving merchant ships. You arrive in the city at the very moment when the deadly mechanism of the epidemic has already been set in motion, and the clock is ticking down to a matter of hours. This is an absolute and merciless apocalypse within the confines of a single massive metropolis, and you have not a single chance of escaping this plague. Panic in the city will reach unimaginable and completely uncontrollable proportions when people realize the true scale of the massive deadly threat looming over them. Neighbors will stop talking to one another, merchants will abandon their stalls, and the city guard will scatter to the surrounding villages in hopes of saving themselves. Crowds of people driven mad by fear will try to storm these outposts, creating massive stampedes in which the weak are simply trampled into the mud. You will find yourself trapped in this gigantic stone trap, where the air is thick with the stench of bodies rotting alive and endless human despair. The streets will quickly empty, and the only sound left will be the endless creaking of carts, as corpse collectors haul the dead to massive mass graves. The pain in your buboes will become so unbearable that you will beg for a swift death as the greatest blessing in your life. The infection will penetrate your lungs, causing a bloody cough, and every breath will be accompanied by a sharp pain in your chest, torn apart by the coughing. Your brain will melt from the extreme fever, plunging you into terrifying hallucinations where medieval demons merge with images of the modern world. You will die in complete solitude, in the cold mud, without painkillers, clean water, or the slightest human compassion from those around you. The plague will leave you not a single chance. It will destroy you with the cold and merciless efficiency of nature's most perfect weapon. Even if you possess perfect health and genetics, the mortality rate from bubonic plague in such horrific conditions approaches an absolute 100%. No knowledge from the 21st century will help you synthesize antibiotics in a filthy basement from a bunch of rotten cabbage and horse manure. This bacterium wiped out nearly half the population of vast Europe, and a single modern person without medicine is nothing more than another tiny grain of sand to it. Your journey through time will end right here, in a vast, nameless mass grave near Paris, alongside tens of thousands of other unfortunate victims. The Black Death will draw a final, cruel line under all your pitiful attempts to survive in this utterly hostile historical period. A journey to medieval Paris in the year 1348 is not a fascinating romantic stroll, but a guaranteed one-way ticket. We are accustomed to romanticizing the past, gazing at beautiful Gothic cathedrals and reading fairy tales about noble knights in shining steel armor. But the reality is that everyday life in that era was a continuous series of suffering, pain, and a constant struggle against death. Filth, disgusting water, bitter cold, dangerous food, and total unsanitary conditions were killing people by the thousands, even before the Great Plague struck the city. Modern humans, deprived of their usual comforts and medicine, would be utterly unviable in these harsh and incredibly brutal historical realities. That is precisely why we must be incredibly grateful to progress for the simple things that surround us in our peaceful modern lives. Clean tap water, a warm, soft mattress, accessible antibiotics, and safe food are true miracles that medieval people could not even dream of. We need history not only to learn dates, but also to understand the hellish ordeal humanity had to endure in the name of comfort. The next time you drink clean water or take a hot shower, remember the horrors of 14th century Paris, and give a huge thank you for the fact that your survival today doesn't depend on dirty puddles, rats, and blind, cruel chance.